Hello, this is Richard Peers of Finextra TV Unplugged, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Marianne Haahr, who's Executive Director of the Green Digital Finance Alliance. Marianne, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we've just finished at Finextra Sustainable Finance Live workshop, and we put a lot of emphasis on the technology that can enable the success of things like the United Nations SDGs and delivering sustainable finance. And this is very much the world that you work in, isn't it? So tell us a bit more about the Alliance.
Yeah, so the Alliance is a not-for-profit. We were launched in 2017 in Davos. And at that time, it was two visionary founders. It was CEO Eric Jing of Ant Financial and the CEO of UNEP, so UN Environment Program, Erik Solheim, who thought, well, the market needs a catalyst because finance is digitizing really fast. But at the same time, we have high green aspirations that currently are not really filtering into mainstream finance, since only 2% of the bond market are green, etc. So they said, let's use this opportunity of digitization to really plug green into this process. And we need a not-for-profit to drive that agenda. So that's our role in the market.
And tell us a bit more about you. Sort of what's your kind of ethos and spirit and background? How did you get into all of this?
Well, I started out actually doing climate finance more at community level in emerging markets. And then I went into sort of more think tanky work, and I bumped into technology almost by accident. Or I was doing innovation labs around the world of how to design green finance instruments. And it was very clear that if I just got sort of more mainstream thinkers that were in sustainability to think up and design new instruments, we were sort of designing the instruments of today and yesterday. It was only at a certain moment where I had sort of almost by accident invited a few people from the sort of operating at the technology frontier. It was specifically a few guys doing blockchain startups in the US, and they just turned everything on its head and showed us entirely new ways of looking at green finance instruments. And from that moment on, that's about 5 years ago, I just started to think this is the community. These are the people that can both think and build to the needs of green finance. So that's sort of been my journey.
And so make it to life for us. Give us an example of something that exemplifies what you're doing at the Green Digital Finance Alliance.
Yeah, so one thing we do very practical is demonstrator projects. For green digital finance, it's early days, so a lot of people will look at us and say, but what is it? What does it look like? So we try to bring partners to bring experimentation to market. So we work in China with Ant Forest. So that is basically the application you can download if you use Alipay mobile wallet. And then if you do that, you invite AI to analyze 18 of your behaviors and give you a real-time CO2 footprint. And that is visualized via green energy points on your screen, which is gamified. So you can steal the green energy points of your neighbor, etc. And when you have reduced your carbon footprint through changing your behaviors, so you have enough green energy points, you plant a virtual tree on your screen, and Ant Financial will then plant a real tree in China, and they will give you proof of impact by filming it with the drones, etc., and sending the images of your tree to your phone. So that's been going on for 4 years now, and it's 550 million Chinese doing that. So we want to take it to the next step. So we've partnered with Ant Financial and the Green FinTech Lab in China, and a trust fund called the CAFI Trust Fund, that is the largest outcome payment mechanism under the Paris Agreement to the 6 African countries that has the second largest rainforest in the world. And basically what we want is that we want to open climate finance to citizens, and we're starting with the Chinese. So we are testing out, is there an appetite, and what would the design look like if you are on your Ant Forest wallet and you have now earned enough green energy points through your green behaviors to plant a tree, that we will also offer you to plant a tree in the rainforest in Central Africa, because it gives you a very high carbon impact and it gives you a very high biodiversity impact. So we are at the point in this demonstration project where we have got an answer to the first question, which is there an appetite? Of course, you will have greater climate impacts by planting a tree in your backyard. But actually, the Chinese users on Ant Forest, 22% say, yes, we would like to plant tree in Central Africa, in the rainforest, and thereby be part of climate finance. So the next stage of this demonstrator project is then to go and design the citizen investing window.
And so how would I mean, that's a fantastic story, and I know that whole Ant financial story pretty well, having followed it for quite some time. And there's so many layers to Ant Financial and Alibaba, which, I think we could discuss this, in a series taking about 2 weeks, because their influence and scale and use of technology is extraordinary. But if we just follow that path through, which says, okay, so now the Chinese citizen is now done enough work, they've got their credits, they've planted the tree in Central Africa. How does and you spoke about in China, obviously it's monitored through drones, and I know they have site visits and so forth. How does the citizen know that that is actually happening in Africa? Same mechanism, or is there technology involved?
There's also technology involved and different partner, because in China, it's also NGOs that are actually doing the surveillance of the tree, of the proof of impact. In the Central African context, it would be the CAFI Trust Fund. So it's their partners, which is UN organizations mainly, but that is also satellite photo. Yeah. It's drones. And it's also monitored from people on the ground that do take photos of the trees, etc. Because CAFI Trust Fund is already really good at doing the proof of impact monitoring of the metrics, because they do outcome payments to these states for basically keeping carbon in the ground. Yeah. So lots of technology, sort of Earth observation technologies involved in this.
Right. So that area, as you know, I'm very excited about. And if we look at all of those technologies, you create a world of data, alternative data, some would call it big data. Can that data be brought back into the world of sort of, mainstream finance, so that they can then use that as a basis to inform things like ESG and other reporting mechanisms that are popular at the moment?
Yeah, most certainly. I think we're going to see over the next couple of years, it's going to be driven, especially in the European Union, by new regulation coming up, but also by an interest from asset owners and asset managers to really move further down the path of ESG. So I think what technology and fintechs brings is really that it can take us closer to an entirely new metrics or reporting regime, away from the self-reported data, which is mainly the data that is the basis of ESG products today, to either asset level directly reported data through IoT. So it's the asset that will communicate the data. It's the solar cell that will communicate how many kilowatt hours have been produced directly to the ledger of an investor. Or it will be Earth observation data. So it will be, for instance, for trees. So for forestry investments, you can automatically geotag the tree and monitor it from the ground, and you can decide its species, etc. I think the Earth observation data regime is going to mature and accelerate a lot. One of the problems with it today is the costs associated with acquiring the satellite data that is specific to an investment and analyzing it. But as soon as that costs are going to drop, we're going to see much more sort of asset self-reported or observed data sets.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we discussed at our workshop was, when you look at the EU taxonomy that you referred to, that Elena, who's involved in the technical working group, spoke about that being the beginning of a journey. And when we said, well, what about all this alternative data that you're describing? How do we help people to do to know the provenance of that, and then combine that with the standards that are coming out of the EU taxonomy? Do you guys, in your experiments, help people wrestle to the ground, bringing all of this data together in a way that they can manage and understand and benchmark in a classic financial way?
That is not where we have worked as of now. Where we're working mostly now, and what we are going into work with data and automated green data, is much more in automated credit scoring of SMEs. Okay. Yeah. So that's really the space, also because we work in Europe, but we also work quite a lot in emerging markets. And there it's such an important financial resource allocation tool is the AI supervised credit scoring. So that's where we want to get the green data sets in.
Gotcha. Now tell us, with the technologies, you touched on AI there, and you've mentioned IoT, Internet of Things, you've kind of, almost mentioned DLT, blockchain. What's your scorecard, state of the nation? Where are we on the hype curve, the trough of despondency with a few of these things in this application area?
Yeah, I think we've done quite a lot of country mappings of the state of sustainable digital finance, and there we also map what are the underlying technologies. And it's very clear that there are some jurisdictions where DLT has matured much more than in others, Germany, for instance. But I think most of the DLT powered solutions are still at the proof of concept level. They are lesser scaled. Satellite data and use of satellite data in financial decision making, especially in risk management, especially of deforestation, because trees are much more easy to see from the sky. I think that's much more mature. There we see Rabobank is applying it. A number of sort of incumbents are using satellite data. IoT, from our analysis, is also extremely early. The integration of IoT into fintech software is very, very early days. Mainly we see it in energy. So we are still in sort of a world where the data sets that are being presented to financial decision makers is mainly web troll data. It's mainly sort of more existing databases.
And when I hear this and people say, well, therefore it's too early, we can't use it. And I always think, well, if it's a golden quality piece of data, then surely you would use that within your data sets, and you would use it as an indicator of quality, which you can then match with your existing data sets. How do you sort of say to somebody who says, yeah, a bit early days for us to use that? What's the way that you go about incorporating this into a risk profile, perhaps?
Well, I think one thing is that all the Earth observation data, some of it may be too early, and nobody wants to sort of take the cost of being the first one. But the other parts of the data is that there are a lot of data sets sitting out there that are either machine generated or that are just entered and are sitting in more sort of open source databases. They're just not translated into financial decision making. So they're ready to be used and they're ready to be read by machines. For instance, some of the things we're looking at now is that you have in the European Union, for many countries, you have fertilizer accounts per geolocalization of each farm. So you know exactly how much phosphate is being put into what area. And then you know exactly the sort of the wetland area it's part of. So you know exactly how much of that phosphate, for instance, ends up in the ocean. Yeah. And so you could pretty easily apply a machine algorithm to say, okay, if you're doing a credit, an agricultural credit in this geolocalization, your ocean impacts on biodiversity are going to be this, this, and this. So I think a lot of the data sets are readily available. But I think a lot of the fintech innovators are not necessarily looking for those data sets. A lot of the financiers are not asking for those data sets. So I think a lot of it is just ready to be mined.
Yeah, and you spoke briefly about your analysis that you're doing of different geographies and Germany's strength, etc. Can you give us a teaser about what that work is and when we might be able to sort of see some outcomes from it?
Yeah, so that work is under the UN Secretary General's Task Force for Digital Financing of the SDGs, where we were knowledge partner, and there will be a launch of that work. It's already going to be in July. And basically what that is a tool that maps out the state of sustainable digital finance at country level. So it basically gives you a number of key data sets. So it gives you, for instance, how big a percentage of all the fintechs in a country are delivering sustainable digital finance. What are the underlying technologies that are powering them? So are they in the high-tech segment or are they more low-tech? And then which big business segments in a country are really organically giving rise to more sustainable digital finance innovations? Is it mainly in payments? Is it mainly in e-asset management, etc.? And then a country can use that to see where they are, what's the state of their ecosystem, and then translate that data into recommendations of how to mature the ecosystem and further nudge it to innovate more sustainable digital finance.
Right. So we're sort of seeing a picture where the regulation, the EU taxonomy and so forth is coming through. You're doing the assessment of the ecosystems and the readiness and position as it is. You've got the technology dimensions, and then you as a catalyst are bringing those forces together. And then, as you say, sort of concentrating around China and financial, etc., then executing many of those variables to see what the outcome could be. And then what do you do after that? Do you sort of say, you know, of course the job is never done. Do you move on to other projects? How do you sort of, you know, see your pipeline and future around what you're achieving at the moment?
Yeah, so at the country level mappings, that's really to guide countries that are more sort of overall policy ecosystem level. So that's something we do with countries when they need it, and we're going to implement it through partnerships with UN because they can really take it to scale. And then for the demonstration projects, that's where we are the catalyst. So we show what's possible. So we have this to make citizen green asset owners, Chinese investing in Africa. And then we have this whole sort of work stream of that I touched upon on building green into AI supervised credit scoring. So these are the three work streams, and it's the last one that we are focusing on bringing to market at the moment.
And on the credit scoring, you know, with AI supervised credit scoring, obviously this is something that Ant Financial, you know, really in a way pioneered, didn't they? They took that individual usage of the app and behavioral types, and then allowed them to actually give the virtual credit card to the individual consumer, which then created that sort of boom of growth connected to the Alibaba ecosystem. And I think they were using blockchain at quite some scale, quite a number of years there as well. Do you refer to that sort of model and you know and applying it to this particular area, or are you sort of going, well, you know, we're just going to create a whole new experiment in this space? You know, how much reference is there to what was done in Ant Financial?
Well, there's quite a lot of reference because it's the IFC and MyBank that are developing a standard for integration of green into automated credit scoring that we are going to also take to other markets, because the idea is really, and sort of our big vision is to make every citizen on the planet a green asset owner. And in most of the markets in Africa and Southeast Asia, or mainly in Africa, that's not an opportunity. You just don't have the green assets available. So, and at the same time, you have most of the economies being made up of SMEs that are being automated credit scoring now and get some of them access to capital. But we see if you can data maximize on the analytics of that data already used for credit scoring, there are actually quite a number of green metrics that are hiding in there. Mm-hmm. And that means we can start to actually take some of that behavioral thinking into to credit scoring, and then to how the credit is given to SMEs. So also make that more behavioral dependent. So if you perform well on a number of ways to twist your operations to more green, that you can get a rebate on your loan, or you can get advice, or you can get other things that can move you down a pathway of becoming more green. And in the end, really build new asset classes of green SMEs that we can package into micro green bonds or other types of financial instruments that would then be presented to citizens in these markets that can then become green asset owners. That's really sort of the idea and vision about this.
And it, you know, you can't have this conversation, I suppose, these days, particularly as we're all being told with COVID to get track and trace apps, and there's the talk about centralization, decentralization, data privacy, etc. You know, obviously with AI as well, there's the whole ethics piece on bias. When you bring some of those lenses to what you're doing, how do you sort of calm people's fears about how their data is being used with these things in mind?
Well, it's always consent-based, and we always have a close dialogue with regulators and policymakers, and it's only if people want to share this data, and they only want to share the data if they see value in sharing that data. And usually now SMEs, because they are perceived as high risk, they get microloans for 10, 20, 30% interest rates. So just get a rebate on that is really motivating, because that can make your business run so much smoother. And if you can then get a perspective around, well, I can actually invest, and I can see that if I become a green SME, I suddenly go in to play a different game, then that's highly motivational. But all of it is consent by the business owner.
Marvelous. Well, I think we could talk about this all day, and I'd love for you to come back and tell us about the progress, and we look forward to working with you. But for now, Marianne, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.